All right, in this last lesson, I'm going to teach you how to do SQL, right? How to work with a SQL server from within your workflow scripts. So first I want to show you, I'm using the Azure database, which is ultra dbsvr.database.windows.net. You can look up in the documentation how to get to this SQL server from Enterprise Manager, but that's what I'm using for my example here. And you're welcome to also use this for your example. It's just a test database that we have in Azure. I'm using the UltraRad database in Azure. Of course, you don't want to break any of the schema in here because we use that schema, so you can make your own tables if you want, or you can use your own database, which might be a little bit safer. But I think we're all familiar with what this table looks like, right? This is just a standard DCM patient study table. There's nothing out of the ordinary here, except I'm showing the institution name and address, which you'll see why in a second. I think we're going to work with those two fields. So if you wanted to get this information and update information in the database from a workflow script, you have the ability to do that. The first thing that you're going to have to do in your workflow scripts, well, first let me show you. I'm starting from scratch again with my workflow scripts, so I removed all the code from our previous examples. But if you go into workflow descriptions, we have to add something in here in order to use a resource. So I'm going to take out that last slash on the end, and then because I did that, I have to close the workflow tag. All right, now that we've closed the workflow tag, I have to add a resource for a database. So to do that, we're going to create an item called resource name. So our name is going to be, in this case, I'm going to call it UltraRad because that's the name of my database. The type is going to be a 1. 1 meaning that it's a database. I don't know exactly what mode means, but I know it's supposed to be set to a 1. By the way, this is case sensitive because it's because this is XML. You have to make sure you use the correct case. DB. So I'm going to put in the connection string to my server. So in this case, the server is ultra dbsvr.database.windows.net. Let's see, our database name is UltraRad, as I showed you. The user ID that we're using is Ultra, and the password is our typical password, which was route12 $% JEU. I always forget if it's all caps or not. And that should be it. That's all we need for the database connection string. And I think we don't need anything else in that, so we can close our resource. Just like we closed workflow before, you can just put that / at the end, and it should work. All right, so now that we have our new resource, we have to use that resource, right? So we've got our resource entered in here. Now we have to somehow reference that in our script. So to do that, to reference that, let's go into our, by the way, we have to save it. Don't forget to save it. We're going to go into our script, and we're going to add some lines in here that allow us to use that resource. So a couple lines that we have to add. First, we have to add some, I'll put in here for database. All right, so we're going to add a type data source. That's going to be a string, and it's going to be ultra workflow service dot data source, and we're going to reference that as L_data, and just make a generic object for that. And I'm going to set it to blank, that way it's not nothing. Otherwise it'll be defaulted as nothing. All right, so we've got some variables that we can work with. LData is going to be the primary one. Type data source is just a reference for this string. This is kind of optional. I mean, you could just hard code it, which really would work just as well. But inside your script, so hit the load resources. There are more than just database resources. I'm not going to show you any other ones in this video series, but there are other ones like things that, there's a lot of things we use for Ultra Prefetch, which are resources, and you'll see those for Ultra Prefetch. I'm not entirely sure how to get at some of those variables, but we could in the future maybe have a video that shows how to do that, because it is nice to have those variables in the XML so that you can get, that way users don't have to put things in the script itself, right? So all these parameters in theory could be in that XML description rather than being in the script, so that our customers never have to touch our script. But for right now, let's go ahead and load our resource for the database. So basically we have to go through each one of those resources. So I'm going to do it like this. We're going to loop, create, we've covered loops a little bit before, but basically this is an object. Okay, so we're going to get a list of objects in v_resources. Now you're probably wondering, where the heck does v_resources come from? Notice it's passed into our script, right? So process, one of the parameters, we talked about vlog before. Resources is an object, and it's not just any object. Notice it has the little parentheses on the end. So it's more like an array. It's a list of a bunch of things, right? It's multiple objects. And we're going to basically loop through all of these objects. By the way, I have to change this to resource. So for each v_resource that is an object in v_resources, right? For each one of those, I always try to remember to put my next in the end before I forget. So for each one of those, first we're going to check to see if it's a database resource. So if the resource, so let's get the type. That's just basically the get type is a property of v_resource, right? One of those objects. So one of the properties is going to be the type. Now we're going to convert it to a string and see if it is this type data source. Now, like I said before, you could just paste this in, right? We don't even need this this line up here. Theoretically, we could just put it in there, but I guess this is the way everybody's used to doing it, so I'll do it like this. All right, so if, and I'm going to end my if before I forget. So if that's true, then we're going to set LData, which is our database resource, to the resource, right? So what's happening in the background here is, so basically in the background, if in whatever calls process, which is the Ultra Workflow service, one of the resources that we have available to us is a database, and we can do things with that database. So basically LData is a whole class, a whole object that gets handed into our little script, which is a connection to that database that we can work with. So we can begin working with that database, and we can do database transactions. So that's going to be our next step. Is we're gonna try to use that database to do some database transactions. So give me 1 second. So we're going to jump down here to our script, and we're just going to do a nice basic little script here. All I'm going to do is read in that database table that we were looking at before, DCM patient study. We're just going to loop through those records and output some stuff, and then later on we can figure out how we can actually use it. So first I'm going to create a variable for my SQL query. I'm just going to call it L_SQL, but you can call it anything you want. Yeah, it's obviously not very descriptive. In the real world, you probably want to use something a little more descriptive. And actually, I'm just going to go ahead and paste that SQL query that I listed up here. And I don't want to have more than one variable get returned, right? So I want to take out the D80 and 81 because otherwise we'll get a bunch of stuff we don't want. So in any event, so I'm going to select everything from DCM patient study. I could put a where clause in there if I wanted to, right? So I could add some stuff in there for a where clause and only select certain things. So next, after I get my my SQL statement, now I'm going to call that SQL statement, right? So we have to create a dataset object. So I'm going to call it DS for dataset, right? Actually, I always like to put our L in front of it. So LDS, and this is common. We use this a lot in our scripts. We just use DS as a shorthand for data set. You could make it more descriptive, right? For example, I could just do, L studies, right? That'll work fine. In fact, I'll do that. And we'll make this, so it's not a string. Instead, it's going to be a system.data.dataset. Okay, and I'm going to set that equal to L underscore data dot data dot query SQL DB. And you do have to spell it right. There we go. So L data dot data dot query SQL DB. That is a method, and we're going to pass into that method the our query, which in this case is just L underscore SQL. I'm not sure what the false does. I'm sure development could probably tell us what that does. I forget what that does. But in any event, so once we have that, right, the next piece is pretty straightforward. We're just going to, now that we've run that command, so basically what that does is it runs that SQL statement. So now L studies is the result from running this SQL command. Now if that SQL command fails, I think you get an exception. We can play with that so you can see what that looks like. But if it fails, you're going to get some kind of exception in your script, but it's very nondescript. I'm going to show you what that looks like. But in any event, now that we have that, now we're going to try to loop through those records. That dataset object gives us tables and rows. Okay? So the first thing we want to do is make sure that we have some tables, or really one table. Most of the time we get one table back. So if we're going to check that property. So we should have a property for tables, and then count. And we want to make sure we have at least one of those. Right? So if we have one of those, I'm going to end my if statement. Then we're going to check to see if we have rows in that table. So if L underscore studies dot table 0 dot rows is greater than 0, right? It's going to give us the count on the number of rows. Sorry, I forgot. It's rows.count. I'll make it capital just so it looks nice. So if that works, let me end that if statement. That means we know we've got rows. And if we have rows, that means that we can loop through those rows. So for each study, and this is going to be a data row, which is basically a collection of results for each row, right? And I'll show you how to reference that. And this is going to be in L, well actually I can just copy it from here. It's going to be in rows, right? So in this collection of rows, we're going to get each L underscore study. And now we can just log some stuff out, right? So I'm just going to do v underscore log dot write event. We've done this a few times before, right? So how about we'll write the patient name. And how do we reference that? It's going to be L study and then the column name. In this case, D00100010. And then, let's see, we're going to do, we're going to call this study. There we go. All right. Maybe we should put a couple other fields in here too. So I'll also add maybe the patient ID, and we'll do the accession number. All right, so we're going to output a few columns here in our log file, and that should be it. I think that's it. Pretty short script, right? So let's see if it works. So we're going to go ahead and restart. And we should see some new log entries, unless I made an error in my, maybe I had a typographical error. Happens all the time to me. Let's take a look. Well, looks like we have two errors here. We have on line 52, type system.data.dataset is not defined. And on line 56, system.data.dataRow is not defined.
Doing this now. Yep.
So I had one compile error, and I had to make one minor change. So you'll notice in the script when we look at our workflow descriptions. So for the COD references, this parameter right here, you'll notice before we got that weird error about missing system.data. So you have to reference system.dll is what we had before, but you also need system.xml.dll and system.data.dll. And then, of course, the rest of these can remain the same, which we were using before, although you don't really need this last one right now because we're not doing any DICOM operations right now. But the rest of these you do absolutely need to have, so make sure you put these in. I don't know why, but for me, I had to put them in this order before it worked. I'm not entirely sure why. So there are 3 of them here in this order, and then you have the Microsoft Visual Basic and then the Ultra DICOM DLL. So once you have that in place, here's a copy of the script that is working. Yours should look very similar to this. Again, we're just selecting from DCM Patient Study, and we're going to output some DICOM tags down here. So let's go back over to here and start our service, and we should see it output some fields. So let's see what happens.
We'll just update DCM Patient Study, and we'll strip private tags, and that'll at least be. I don't know.
Okay, so it started, and right away we got a whole bunch of log lines here. So here's all the patients that we have in our little demo database. So it worked. Now I want to show you one other thing about databases, and this is kind of important. Before I was talking about the institution name and the institution address.
Okay. Oh, by the way,
so
anonymize HL7 too.
Let's put institution in here. So I'm going to change this to tag 880. That's going to be our institution name.
They want us to anonymize.
I have to stop the script. Give me 1 second.
Which is simple. And then they want us to convert it to an SR and attach it to the study. And I'm like, okay, there's a lot going on here.
All right, so let's go ahead and run this. Now we should see something a little different here now. Let's wait for the script to start. Okay. Notice this time we get an exception, right? So we get an exception here. It says DB null to string, right? We got this right away on the first patient it started the process, right? So here's the lines for the next restart. As soon as it got through the first patient, it outputted the patient name, the patient ID, the accession number rather. But then we get this exception. It says DB null to string. It has an exception trying to convert those string description. But this doesn't really make a lot of sense when you read this. But I can tell you what this is because we get it all the time. It's a pretty common issue. The problem is that this value, 880, if you look in my database, let me bring my database engine back up. Notice that 80 and 81 are both null, right? So these are both null values. When it's null in the database and it gets returned as null to our script, that causes a problem. So we're going to add a new function here that's going to handle nulls. So let me paste in my new functions, and these are pretty common. We use these all the time, so you'll probably find them in one of your sample scripts. So I just added these 2 functions, the cnull function and cnullInt. Cnull, basically, if you use cnull, it'll convert a null into a string that just has no value. So let me scroll back up to our code. We're skipping through all of our functions here. We've written a lot together through these exercises. So I'm going to put a cnull around this field, and now it should work. Let me restart. And we'll come over here and see if we get an update in here. Just waiting for it to restart. All right, there we go. Now the institution name is blank. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Now we should put the cnull on all of these. Anytime you use a database field, you should always put cnull around it because those null values are going to ruin your day if you forget to do that. Something's going to be null at some point. Now what I could do is here I could say, I can add a where clause where D00080080 is null or D00080081 is null. And now, in addition to doing this, I can create a SQL statement. We're going to update the institution. All right, so we're going to update DCM underscore patient underscore study, set D00080080, and I'm going to put Ultrarad Corporation and D00080081 equals 301 Pine Edge Drive in Berlin. Kind of abbreviated here. Now I can't just, I have to add a where clause, right? So where D00200000D equals, and now I have to put in the accession number. Now before, up until now, I've been building strings by closing the string and then doing ampersand and then the next variable. But this time I'm going to show you something a little different. I'm going to put a 0 here in brackets. So these are brackets, by the way, little curly braces that's above your enter key, and you have to hit shift, not the square braces, but the curly braces. And then when we do it this way, we're going to do string.format, and then we can put an argument in. So for every integer that you have in brackets, you have to have one matching argument for each integer in the order that they're indexed, right? So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It doesn't matter where the zeros and ones are in the string. They can be anywhere. And you can have multiples, and it'll just fill it in multiple times. But it will substitute that bracketed number or integer for a value. In this case, the value that I want is going to be the study instance UID. So I'm going to put the study instance UID here. All right, so now that's our update statement. I'm going to output it to the log just so we can see it. So update institution name, and we're going to put that right here. Can't save yet. Then I'm just going to run that query. Now, to run the query, all I have to do is call this function with that value. So we don't have to set a variable or anything. We just call it. This isn't always the best practice, but it works. So let's go ahead and restart our service and see if it works. All right, it ran. So you can see here's our update statement. And assuming this ran, let me go back to our code. So assuming this ran and did what it's supposed to do, and by the way, I'm going to scroll this over if you need to pause to see this syntax. Again, it's string.format, and then in parentheses is your string, followed by a comma, and then all of your parameters. And you can have more than one. So I could have a 0, 1, 2, 3, and they're all just separated by commas at the end. It's a little bit cleaner when you're formatting a string with a lot of different variables in it. It's better than putting ampersands all over the place. It definitely looks a little bit nicer. But now, when I run this SQL statement, whoops, I opened up a new window instead. Let's do this again. There we go. So now we have our values. So that's how we work with databases. Frequently with our scripts, what you'll be doing is using a database query to select some records to do some logic, and then you're going to do some logic. Could be updating the database, could be changing DICOM files. Remember, we can get the path to our files and our HL7 messages. All of that stuff's in the database. So it's just a matter of using those database queries to get data from the database, selected data, and to update data in the database. What you could do as an exercise, now that we've gone through all of this stuff, the next exercise you could do is to combine all this, right? So you could read data from the database, get the DICOM file, update something in the DICOM file, update the database to match it, and save the file, right? So you could go through and do something like that. And I may record another video in the future that shows you how to do that. But for now, this should be enough for you to get started and to see the basic syntax for using workflow.